To an American slave owner, the people he or she bought or inherited were an investment no different than a farm animal. The enslavers' attitudes ranged from paternal condescension to cruel domination, but none of it involved freedom. Work was strictly regulated. It lasted from can't-see morning till can't-see night. For the vast majority of those enslaved in Texas, that meant growing and picking cotton. Not everyone toiled in the fields, though. On the most prosperous Texas plantations, some in bondage worked in a sawmill, flour mill, cotton gin, or cotton press. Along the upper Gulf Coast were sugar plantations, where the work meant even longer hours and more potential for injury. Elsewhere in Texas, slaves worked full-time as cowboys, but everywhere, enslaved men had charge of livestock, poultry, and riding horses. Almost every building and the first railroads in the oldest parts of Texas were constructed by enslaved laborers. The slaves did the hardest work. Urban slavery was an entirely different way of life from the farm. Most held in bondage within a city worked as house servants, gardeners, or horse grooms and stable hands. Longshoremen were often enslaved. Others were skilled laborers who were often rented out. Those occupations included blacksmiths, carpenters, and barrel makers, and for women, seamstress or cook. Sometimes their owners allowed them to keep a small portion of what they earned from their hard work, even though their every action remained under the control of others. Of course, these African Americans existed as people outside of work hours. Thanks to the 1930s Slaves Narrative Project, we have first-hand information about their lives, from what they ate to where they slept. The Texans' diet, regardless of race, was mostly pork and corn, but the enslaved received the less desirable cuts of meat. Slave owners provided food in quantities to maintain strength in the fields, but some Texas slaves were called overseers who cut their rations of meat and meal to save money. In many cases, the enslaved supplemented their fare with wild game and vegetables from a small garden, but those choices needed the approval of whites. Clothing or material to make it was handed out, sometimes as infrequently as once a year. By 1860, enslaved Africans made up over 30% of the total population of Texas. Many dozens of plantations held more than 100 people in bondage. Away from the white owner's home could sit as many as 20 or more frame houses for the families of field workers, plus a half dozen more for house servants. The largest plantations might even have a hospital and day nursery staffed by enslaved women. In some places, a doctor made monthly visits. It was all designed to maximize the owner's investment and control all aspects of their property. Punishment, including whippings and beatings, was handed out by some owners, but not others. The worst part was the complete denial of basic freedom. These enslaved people knew that they would face this fate for the rest of their lives, as would their children and grandchildren. They also held constant fear of family separation. Many Texas slaves ran away, but usually for short periods of time. Few were willing to leave their spouse or children behind. The enslavers counted on it. But for some in lifelong bondage, a small act of disobedience to deny their valuable labor to those who held them, or a few simple days of freedom, imagining what could be, was worth any punishment they received.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Coming for to carry